And here's the inequality in education. I was testifying at the Phoenix Sinclair inquiry on Monday, and the commissioner asked me about, well, you know, if these First Nations communities aren't economically viable, then why wouldn't we just, you know, move these kids to other areas? Well, they're not viable when you're a First Nations child and you're getting less education and improper schools, and you're not being able to grow up and get the job of your dreams. It's pretty hard to do an economic base off of that. And this is Shannon Kustachin, one of my heroes. We don't have time today to share her very inspirational story, but do know this. It's that she lived for 15 years. She came from Attawapiskat First Nation. Her school sat on a toxic waste dump of 30,000 gallons of diesel fuel. And she was alive to the reality that they don't have in the Indian Affairs funding formula monies for libraries or computers. And I regularly talk to university students, and I ask them, I said, and let's do it here. Who thinks that you would be in your current job if in elementary school you had no access to computers or a library? This is not rocket science, it's common sense. So she asked non-Aboriginal children by the thousands to write letters to the government so that every First Nations child would have a proper school to go to and would get an education that made them feel proud of who they are too. She tragically dies at the age of 15, never having seen the school built in Attawapiskat. But thousands of children who she inspired are continuing the movement called Shannons Dream, where children are writing to elected officials. And they're not partisan. They don't care if you're a conservative or if you're on the left or the right. The bottom line is that education, as Shannon would say, school's a time for dreams and every kid deserves this. And every child knows that that's true. There's the old saying that it's so easy that even a kid gets it. Well, in this case of Shannon's Dream, the kids do get it. The government is just starting to get it. And so we need to continue to eradicate these inequalities. And here they are, the kids. This is them in front of Parliament. They built that school in an afternoon. And when I asked them why they built it, they said, well, they were reading in Canadian Geographic magazine that in the time Shannon and her friends were waiting for the school, that the government of Canada had built 75 schools in Afghanistan. Now that's something we should be able to do, but it raises questions why these kids are still waiting for their school. And we have it here in Alberta, right? Little Buffalo First Nation School often goes without water. It's not something that happens just in Northern Canada. So the kids told me that they wanted to show the government, it's not that hard to build a school, you can do it. We'll help. And let's talk about this remoteness thing, because that comes up a lot in public policy. Well, we can't possibly deliver services to people in these remote areas. Well, number one, the wealth of the nation comes from these remote areas. And my view is that you're only remote in Canada unless you are sitting on oil sands, diamond mines, or some strategic military position. There will be politicians by the dozens eating seal meat where you are if any of those things apply. And the greatest national resource we have is our kids. And let's face it, we have somebody up there flying around in space twittering right now. So if they can get the guy up into space a Twitter account, they certainly can help kids, no matter where they are, get a good education, right? So here's a story I don't need to tell you. You all know it. The number of First Nations children in Alberta who are Aboriginal, who are in child welfare care, is staggering. It reaches and exceeds the number that were in residential school at the height of their operations. And the reasons that they're driven there are poverty, poor housing, and caregiver substance misuse, linked to residential schools. Those are the factors. And people will call it neglect. But this is an area of a lot of controversy. I have been doing child welfare. I did it on the line as a line worker for 13 years, and I've been involved for close to 30 years. I don't know what neglect means. Who here knows? It is the #1 reason children get referred to child welfare and get removed from child welfare. And we don't even know what it means. In the United States, there's been a growing movement to make it unlawful to actually put in the Child and Family Services Act that you cannot remove a child when the primary issue is poverty. Because it happens all the time. You won't see that on a report to court, but it gets codified as poverty. What we do is we send in workers, and they get into a home and there's no food in your home. And because of the stress of being poor, maybe you're doing substance misuse, or maybe you're in residential schools. And what I do is I send you to parenting classes. Now, that's ridiculous, right? There's a reason why Nanny 911 does not go into poor drug-addicted families. You notice they're all middle class or pretty wealthy. Those people have better homes than I do, right? I could turn around those people in a week. Elders could do it in 3 days, but I need the extra time, right? But this is what we're doing in child welfare. We're actually we're holding parents' feet to the fire for things they can change, and that's fine. But we're also holding their feet for the fire for things that we're ignoring, that are beyond their ability to do. And what I hear time and time again by child welfare providers is, oh, well, we can't do everything about poverty. So is it any wonder why families who are coming to our attention with poverty, poor housing, and substance misuse as issues are not doing that well in our system? Here is a great program for the United States. They actually have become alive to this in the US. 30% of the removals in the US are due to poverty. So they created something called the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. Has anyone heard about this before? It's a great institution. And what they do is they have what they call Title IV-E money from the feds that gets rolled out to the various states. And they really advocate for the reprofiling of child welfare funds for housing relief and for poverty relief. And just to give you an example, the state of Connecticut decided to take a bit of a flyer on this a few years ago and invested an additional $70 million into the child welfare system so that workers could do things like where a family had black mold contamination, get rid of the black mold, for example. Or where a family needed to do a renovation for a child with a disability, to be able to do that. Or to provide rent, emergency rent money, a down payment. So they did that. They invested $70 million a year, and they're saving money doing it. They've done it in other states as well, and what they find is that when you give people a safe place to live, the overall family stress goes down. So yes, it's never housing just as an issue, but when you deal with that, families are less stressed and they're able to tackle other issues. So they are actually saving over $30,000 per family that they're putting on this program. And the cost to them is only about $14,000. So what Australia, the Aboriginal people in Australia and the poverty advocates did there is that they approached the main banks. So in Australia, it's the National Australian Bank and the Bank of New Zealand. And they said, we're not going to ask the legislatures to eradicate these payday loan operations because it'll take them forever. What we want to do is introduce some friendly competition. And this is your core business, and you have to be doing charitable work, so let's get on board. So what they did is they launched a program for persons of low income to get microloans and to establish credit at prime plus just a couple of percent. And these anti-poverty organizations would provide life coaching to families so that they can financially get back on their feet. What was the result? Less stress in families, less kids going into child welfare care, all kinds of good outcomes. The cost of the child welfare system was zero, so that's something that people can do. We have got banks turning record profits in this country, and it's about time that they started to leverage their core business for the benefit of poor Canadians. So that's another example of something that could be done. And if we were to do that, who in the room thinks that that would be something that would be helpful for families that you're working with? Yeah. But we need to get at inequality as a root cause too, and that'll take two things. One is our tolerance for it. We need to absolutely make it unacceptable that racial discrimination against children is a legitimate fiscal restraint measure. We must pledge to never have that happen. In Alberta and in other statutes, it says the safety and well-being of the child is the paramount consideration. But in practice, it's the safety and well-being of the child is a paramount consideration if we get a check from Indian Affairs. And that has to stop. These kids are sacred, and they deserve an equal opportunity. So we decided in 2007 with the Assembly of First Nations, on authority of all the chiefs across the country, and our little caring society of 4 people to file a human rights complaint against the Government of Canada, alleging that they were racially discriminating against First Nations children by providing less opportunity for families to care for them at home. When we filed that complaint, there was just a handful of people in the room in the news conference we held in Parliament. It was February 27th, 2007, and I will never forget that day. And Teresa Steinhauer, who I know isn't here today, was one of the people who flew to Ottawa to be there with us that day. It was probably the most important human rights case of our time, and nobody was there. I remember walking out into Parliament and hearing the sound of my shoes go down the step. And it would have been easy to believe that caring Canadians simply didn't care, or that people thought we deserved it. Like, where were all these groups? But instead, we chose to believe in the goodness of all people, just like Shannon did. And we believed that if we gave them, helped them understand the inequalities these kids were facing, and gave them an opportunity to learn and to do something about it, they would. So we created the I Am a Witness campaign that has all the legal documents of all of the parties. And we don't ask people to take a side, we just ask people to watch. This is currently the most watched human rights case in Canadian history. There are over 12,000 people and organizations from all over the world. And when you come to the hearings, you're going to hear Canada argue it not on the discrimination claim. They have got other things that they're more worried about. What they argue is the federal government does not think it's fair to it to compare its level of funding for First Nations child welfare to that offered by the provinces. That's unfair, they said. So the case should be dismissed on that. Who agrees with that? Here's argument B. We, the federal government, don't actually deliver child welfare. We have agencies who deliver it via social workers. So if you're delivering an unequal level of service, it's you, the social worker, who should be held accountable for the discrimination, not us as the funder. That's the service argument. And of course, they don't want any of this to be public, so they don't want it broadcast. They have spent over $3 million and 7 years trying to derail this case on the merits. They've lost 4 judgments in the federal court and 1 in the federal court of appeal, all of which have said these issues need to be resolved at the tribunal. This is a case worthy of a full hearing on the facts. So with all of your support and your prayers, on February 25th, 2013, for the first time we know of anywhere in the world, the Canadian government was appearing to respond to allegations it's racially discriminating against kids. And those hearings will go on until the end of the summer. I'm quite confident that they will find there is discrimination. And when they do, they can order the federal government to implement a remedy, which is what we want. It shouldn't be something we should have to take to court, but it is something we will take to court because we can't wait for another generation of kids for them to do the right thing. And if you went outside, that's what you see in front of Parliament, is thousands of children gathering together, writing to their government saying First Nations children deserve a chance to grow safely in their families, be healthy, go to good schools, and be proud of who they are. And you know, when they're standing up there reading the letters, they really are embodying the very best of citizenship. Because they are talking about the type of Canada they want to grow up in. And what we do is we ask children and adults and community members to write letters to the government so First Nations children can grow up safely with their families, be healthy, go to good schools, be proud of who they are. And then you simply walk to your mailbox and mail the letters. You don't even need a stamp to send them to your elected official or prime minister. And it's really critical. Caring is not enough. Knowing about the solutions is not enough. And we've given you some of those solutions to go after those big issues. The children are going to judge us by what we do. So talk doesn't matter, action does. And I hope coming out of this great forum that we see a real change here in Alberta that the rest of the country can emulate.